Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive into any content, do I have any winners in the room? Poker winners or blackjack winners? All right, so it looks like you guys did exactly the same as I did on the casino floor, so not very good. With that said, my name is Matt Gibietz, and I'm a lead solutions engineer with Dynatrace. Now, today, I have a pleasure to share with you an awesome story. But luckily, you guys will not only hear from me, but you'll also hear from Ustad Singh, who is the observability architect at BPX, and you'll also hear from Narayan Shankar, who is the partnership manager and alliances with AWS for the energy sector. Now, the story that we'll be sharing today is about collaboration and about a story of better together, how BPX, AWS, and Dynatrace collaborated to help with cloud migration, application modernization, and cloud deployment strategies. So with that said, before we actually dive into any other content, let's just go through the agenda. So if you guys take a look at the agenda, hopefully you guys like the very warm introduction in here. Now, the next thing that we'll dive in is a little bit more about what AWS actually does in the energy sector. Now, we'll talk a little bit about Dynatrace, but as I promised you, the star of today's show will be Ustad and the BPX story and how they collaborated with AWS and Dynatrace on their cloud deployment strategies. So with that said, I'll pass it to you, Narayan, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. First of all, I'm super delighted to be here. This is my second re:Invent and got to meet so many customers and partners, and I hope you're having an amazing time like me here. So let me see. Okay, there we go. So like Matt introduced, I'm the partnership manager for AWS in the energy sector. For those of you who are unaware of what is AWS doing in the energy division, we have a dedicated, carved-out business unit within AWS, specifically to cater to energy customers. We have a team of around 400+ experts that bring deep domain expertise and are also trained on the latest cloud technologies. They're also certified cloud practitioners. So they have an average tenure of around 17 years, almost 2 decades. We've worked with a whole plethora of customers, all the way from energy producers to distributors to end energy consumers as well, and everybody in between. What's unique is we've built 200+ solution accelerators, and which basically gives our customers a jump start to build specific use cases on top of AWS frameworks, which is co-built with our consulting partners as well as our technology partners. To name a few, energy data insights. So it is our solution that helps democratize the subsurface information and then rapidly derive analytics from your subsurface data. Another example would be carbon data lake, where we are working with customers to help them track the emissions data, the Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, and build workflows around that. Another example would be the renewable data lake, specifically for customers who are in the energy transition journey or are pivoting towards alternate sources of energy. We have the renewable data lake to help them accelerate some of those workflows as well. And we couldn't do this without our partner community. We have a very vibrant ecosystem of partners, 130,000+ partners that we work with, that help augment the efforts and build specific use cases and bolt-on solutions on top of the AWS services. All right, so as we all know, the energy landscape is changing, and AWS would like to work with customers in whatever their journey looks like, right? We believe in working backwards from the customers and bringing a unique set of industry expertise, services, solutions, and partner technologies to the table, and help our customers with their unique business goals. Now, our key objective within the energy space is to help our customers produce energy in efficient, cost-effective, and in a sustainable way. As you can see here in the visual, you have a glimpse of the entire energy value chain and the different segments of the energy business that we operate in. Towards the middle, left middle section, you see the traditional operators, the exploration companies, the midstream companies, the refinery and downstream companies. We also work with customers who are bringing new energy sources and renewable energy sources online. Towards the middle, you can see the utility companies, right? They're investing in technologies like smart grids to make the grid more resilient as it scales towards new forms of energy consumption, as well as wastewater management and different sustainability initiatives as well. Towards the right, you have the energy consumers, right? The energy consumers can be a B2C, B2B type business, and they are constantly interacting, using their apps, using different call centers to interact with the energy-producing companies. And we have workflows for each of these different segments that we have built with partners. So customers are moving a lot of their traditional applications to the cloud, migrating them and modernizing. A lot of these energy solutions are mission-critical solutions that touch millions of end users, right? So it's very critical that as the customers modernize the applications, you need the right observability platform to help track, maintain, as well as scale these applications in an efficient way. Dynatrace is one of the key partners within the observability space, and we have invested a lot of time and resources to co-build solutions with Dynatrace and bring more innovations to our customers. So with that, I'll pass it on to Matt to talk a little bit more about what that partnership looks like and how we bring some of these joint innovations to customers like BPX and other energy customers. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Narayan. So who in here knows AWS? With a show of hands. OK, perfect. How about BPX? OK. How about Dynatrace? All right, awesome. So we pretty much have everybody that know at least something about Dynatrace. Now, who is Dynatrace? So Dynatrace is an observability company. And our goal is to help our customers find performance and security bottlenecks in your environment and remediate them before they actually impact your users. Now, we have been the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for observability for 14 years. We are very proud of it. So as soon as that ranking came up in observability, Dynatrace has been leading the way, collaborating with great partners like AWS. Now, we're also a very agile company. So we want to make sure that we deliver innovation and new capabilities to our customers on a monthly basis. So you guys will see that we are actually releasing around 25 times a year. We really walk our talk in here. We help customers be agile, but we are also agile. Now, we are also a publicly traded company, so on the New York Stock Exchange, more about the actual solution. So I talked about us helping our customers become proactive and find issues and bottlenecks, whether they're performance or security, and remediate them before they actually impact your users, before they impact your customers. That's a pretty bold statement if you really dissect it. So how are we able to do that in such a complex environments that you guys are seeing today? Now, Ustad will actually tell you how they did it at BPX. But just to look a little bit under the covers of Dynatrace of what our solution brings to the table that allows us to help our customers. The first ingredient of our secret sauce is the fact that Dynatrace is a goldmine of information. We will capture information from the infrastructure side of your environments, from the cloud services side, from the application side, from the real user monitoring side, from the digital side, from the deployment side. Now, the key differentiator in here for Dynatrace is the fact that we will do it with a single component called the One Agent. So it's very easy to start collecting all the data from your environments, no matter how complex your environments are. And you'll see in Ustad's example that was very helpful because they were able to very quickly ramp up and capture all the telemetry that they needed to derive the answers that they were looking for. Now, the second secret sauce ingredient is AI Apps Engine. I'm just looking at you guys. Who already heard the word AI 7,000 times throughout this conference? OK, everybody did. So what's so different about Dynatrace's approach to the AI Apps Engine that we have inside of our platform? First of all, we started with the AI Apps Engine at the core of our platform in 2014. Who in 2014 talked about AI? Not many people. So what I'm saying is Dynatrace started at the core of our platform with AI Apps Engine before AI was even cool. We like to be ahead of the curve. Now, obviously, over the years, the capabilities of our AWS engine evolved. So if you really look under the hood of Dynatrace today, what our AWS engine will be able to do, there will be three main capabilities that we'll bring to the table that really help with the secret sauce that I'm talking about. Number one, the predictive capability. As we have all the goldmine of data that I talked about, having data is just first step. Now you have to apply intelligence on top of it to be able to understand what are your environments are architected like, what your environments are performing like. And this is now the predictive capability of our AIOps engine develops a baseline for every single monitored component in your environments. And then in real time, it compares that baseline against your real-time performance. So really what I'm saying in here is that when you start working with Dynatrace, you don't have to spend hours setting up dashboards and alerts. We will understand what your environment looks like, what it's performing like, and we'll automatically let you know when there are performance or security bottlenecks that are impacting your IT stack. Now, as soon as we let you know that there is something happening in your environment, this is where the second capability of our AIOps engine kicks in. And that's the causal AI. We will actually perform root cause analysis. So you don't have to sit on a call with 30 people asking everybody, is the infrastructure healthy? Is AWS having an outage? Well, you guys don't have many outages, but it's technology, so you never know. Or is it the application? You don't have to ask these questions anymore. You don't have to be on these calls. Our AIOps engine will help you understand what is the root cause of the issues that are impacting your environment, that are impacting your users, that are impacting your customers. And last but not least, we also have the generative AI component to our platform. So we'll actually be able to interact with the Davis Copilot to ask questions about the best practices around the configuration of your observability platform, as well as to help you derive answers from the data that we're already collecting. Now, the last ingredient of the secret sauce is actually the architecture and the backend of our environment. And hopefully you guys don't get bored by this, but if you really talk to people in the monitoring and observability space, nobody really tells you how they do what they do. Now, for us, the backend of our environment is very, very important. We actually went away from proprietary databases like Cassandra and all others, and we created our own data store that allows us to store all of the telemetry that we are capturing. No matter if it's time series data, traces, real user monitoring, we store all that data in exactly the same data repository. So now think back to the causal AI capabilities that we are bringing into the table. That data store allows us to do that because all of the data is always in context, always connected at all times as we're capturing that data from your environment. So hopefully you guys understand a little bit better now what Dynatrace is and what's the secret sauce. Now, the beauty of today's story is that Ustad will actually directly talk to the capabilities that I just talked about with what they achieve at BPX. Now, last thing that I do want to talk about is the partnership between AWS and Dynatrace. And first of all, I want to say thank you, because Narayan already talked about it, but the collaboration between the two organizations in here is amazing. And I think the perfect fact that speaks to it is that we have hundreds of customers who choose Dynatrace to monitor their AWS workloads, but also customers who decide to migrate from other cloud providers and on-prem solutions to AWS while using Dynatrace for observability because of the collaboration and because of the partnership that we have in place. And one data point, we actually also have 7 AWS competencies, so we are very proud of it, and we are working on the next ones. Now, last but not least, we are also a customer of AWS. So like I said, we walk our talk when it comes to our solution, when it comes to the agility of the company. Now, we partner with AWS to help our customers. We also run some of our workloads on AWS as well. Now, that said, that will be enough from me for now. I did say that the star of today's show will be Ustad and the story at BPX, so I'll pass it to Ustad and learn a little bit more about what they did with Dynatrace and AWS when it comes to their cloud deployments.
All right, thank you. All right, so who are we? Well, actually, I'll start with who am I? So my name is Ustad Singh. I am the observability architect at BPX. So what is BPX? BPX is BP Global's US onshore oil and gas business. We wanted to brand ourselves with the BPX because X stands for exploration. So not just in oil and gas, but we like to explore and be on the cutting edge in technology as well. So that's who BPX is. So what were we trying to accomplish? Our main issue was we were tired of customer complaints and having over 60 incidents a month, 60 priority one incidents a month, leading to frustrations, lost revenue, time loss, and so forth. So we were trying to reduce our customer-reported incidents, reduce the downtimes, enable faster resolutions, and enhance reliability, scalability, and resilience. So what was our plan? We started with coming up with a high-level design, right? We wanted to try to get as many data sources as possible. We wanted to, ingest everything we knew about our environment: logs, metrics, traces, metadata about the data, network data, anything and everything you could think of. We wanted those inputs to go into our observability platform, which was unknown at the time. And some of the capabilities we wanted the platform to have were being able to correlate all of this data at a massive scale, right? Be able to contextualize it and help us with root cause analysis. And we figured our outputs from this is going to be basically alerts, right? Alerts and some type of signal. So this is kind of where we started. And there were a couple of KPIs we were going to start to measure, right? We wanted to see near zero downtime, right? So we want to act before our customers know that something's wrong. We wanted to decrease our mean time to resolution, and we wanted to decrease our mean time to detect. And we want the ability to map all these KPIs to business outcomes. So those are some of the key KPIs that we're measuring today. So what steps did we take? We didn't just pull it out of a hat. We decided to look at the do a trait study. We looked at the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We did a trait study with 5 solutions. We picked 3 to POC, and out of the 3, we selected the one that fit our needs the best. So why did Dynatrace fit our needs? It all came down to, really, for me, ease of deployment. It was one of the easiest solutions to deploy in POC, and especially with our teams being very resource constrained, that was super important to us. The multi-cloud support was really important as well. The complex business process monitoring, automation with Ansible, and of course, ServiceNow integration. All right, let's go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, some of the key drivers already, we needed real-time visibility into issues that were happening, proactive issue detection, performance optimizations, reliability, resilience, automated recovery, cost efficiency. These are all some of the key drivers, for this program that we started.
So, Ustad, this is actually a very good kind of slide to maybe ask a little question. If you really look at these are very beefy, right, drivers that you guys put together. Did you come up with those out of the box, or was it kind of a process, or maybe like a journey, that as you were looking at the Dynatrace platform and seeing the different capabilities, you're also developing some of the drivers for the entire process in here?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a journey. Our initial where we started was, can we stop the bleeding? Can we stop having 60 outages, right? It was just insane. We were having an outage every day. So we started from there, and then, from there it moved into, okay, how do we get more proactive, right? Then it was, how do we optimize? We had some applications where we were having performance issues, right? So how do we, optimize the performance of these apps? How do we give the users a better experience, and so on? So it was definitely a journey. Definitely not a day one thing. So, all right. So what are we monitoring today with Dynatrace, right? It's basically 100% of our AWS cloud infrastructure. We have 360 plus applications. We have many complex business processes that span multiple different applications, thousands of SNMP network devices, thousands of scheduled jobs and automations that run within our environment, and also some IoT devices. And then when I say 100% of our AWS cloud infrastructure, I mean everything from Lambdas to managed databases, VMs, everything in between. So So, what do we do with this monitoring data, right? So we have all this monitoring that we're doing now. We have all of our Lambdas instrumented. We have all this great information coming in. But what do we do with it, right? So the way we look at it with our teams are, there's different personas, right? And everybody needs different information. And Dynatrace really makes that easy for us. So for the business, the business just cares about certain KPIs, right? They just want to know, like, is this thing reliable? Like, is it working? Is it not working, right? So we have different views and different things that we have built on top of Dynatrace to facilitate that. So from all the data that comes in and the signals that go out, some of the things that we also have are these different views for all these different personas. Yeah.
How did it look like before Dynatrace, right? So obviously, this dashboard looks really simple, right? Data,
Right.
You look at different things across your stack, across your applications, and you're basically reporting on the availability and performance, right? So
Right.
it seems like a very trivial data. But if you really look under the covers, right, there's a lot that you need to capture to do it. So
Yeah.
were you guys able to even report on such a thing before introducing Dynatrace?
No, not at all. So, I mean, that's, like I said, that's one of the things that, we're now tracking across all of our applications, right? Like, what is the availability, reliability of this application? So I mentioned we have 360 applications that we're monitoring, and we have that data now available for those applications, right? So, now our product owners can say, okay, over the last quarter, the reliability of my application was 95%, 96%. Is that good? Is that not good? I mean, I'm sure if it's 50%, it's probably not good. But we can make those decisions now based on data. Previously, I think it was a feeling, right? So it was a feeling that, hey, my application's running great because I didn't really hear any issues from the business. And then certain applications, there was a feeling that they were really horrible because you heard a lot from the business. They were upset, So it was all a feeling. So now we actually have real numbers, and we can say, hey, you know what? I know you feel this app is bad, but it was really just 30 minutes of downtime in the last quarter, which is amazing. So,
Yeah, no, that's great.
yeah. App teams, so what do our app teams care about? So, with all the monitoring we're doing for applications, there's certain KPIs we look for, right? So internally, we want to measure the maturity of an application. We want to, measure the MTTRs, right? We want to see, response times, how many users are using the application, is this even being used or not used? And for some of the app teams, what's important is, the network. Is my network working properly or not? That's the main question we always have to answer. So network connectivity, application health, service health, database health, so those kind of things. So these are just like a snapshot of, some of the KPIs that we measure for our app teams.
So could you actually dive in maybe to, I think that many of these, I think a lot of folks will understand in here, like the database health, service health. I actually think that the two very interesting tiles is the cost per month and specifically carbon impact, right? I mean, you guys being in the energy sector, that's probably something that's very important for you guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think carbon impact is definitely important. And, as you said, cost is always important to any business, right? So, a lot of our, developers, team members, like, they don't understand what things cost, right? Like, they're usually like, hey, why can't we just throw another VM at it? Why can't we scale this out, But, there's real cost associated to everything. As good as AWS is and the cloud is, and it makes it easy for us to deploy, sometimes the cost can also get out of hand. So in our application views, we started adding the cost for that application. So that's like a monthly cost for that app. So just a quick snapshot. If you end up looking at a dashboard, you actually see like, hey, this is how much it's costing me. And we can also track that trend over time. And if you optimize things, that's another area where even the app teams can claim like they did something great by saying, hey, look, my cost per month used to be this, and I optimized it, and now my cost per month is Y. So.
Right. So definitely a great conversation driver, right? Because just looking at the cost and really thinking about moving from on-prem to cloud or maybe from multi-cloud to AWS, you also have the opportunity to optimize, right? And that metric actually can help you drive the optimization, right? So your cloud migration doesn't become a lift and dump, but it's actually lift and shift, right? While modernizing your stack, while making sure that you are following the best standards and actually utilizing all of the cloud-native services that AWS gives you, right? Because if you just end up popping something from a VM on-prem to an EC2 instance, chances that it might actually cost you more rather than less, right? But the capabilities with AWS in here are great. So being able to have that visibility in here, right, helped you guys also modernize the stack in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So ITSM teams, right? What do they care about? For us, what we deliver to them from the observability team is a quick view to know, like, hey, is this application performing like it's supposed to, whether we SLOs or not, right? Is this an issue that one user is having, or is there actually a detected impact across the board? So, even though the data and everything I've talked about literally is all coming from all the different data sources and all the monitoring that we're doing, right? But as you can see with each persona, it's a completely different view because that's literally what we want to deliver what people care about. So for our ITSM team, they just care about looking at, hey, are there any open issues for this app? Is it working correctly that we know of? Great. So this way, they know, like, when a user calls in, we can say, hey, yes, we're aware of the issue. We're working on it. Or this may be related to just you, so let's try to see if we can debug and see what's going on in your scenario.
So I actually love that dashboard because, right, it actually shows you what's happening inside of the application before the user calls in.
Right. Yeah.
So it really speaks to the proactiveness instead of being reactive and kind of rely on that feeling that you were talking about.
Right.
We have a feeling that the application is not performing well because somebody's complaining, right? Or vice versa. In here, your ITSM folks actually have real-time visibility and they can get proactive with remediation, maybe before even the users log in, maybe before the users even notice there's an issue, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
No, that's awesome.
So digital security. So, one of the other features, we use a lot of features within Dynatrace. One of the other features we use is the AppSec. It really was simple to deploy because all we had to do was check a flag. So, one of the things that we use the AppSec portion of Dynatrace is to help us prioritize, what issues we should act on versus what we shouldn't act on. So, that's how we're using the AppSec model. We have other application security, tools in the environment that will tell us, hey, you have this on disk, right? But what Dynatrace tells us is that, yes, you have that on disk, but this library is actually being used or not being used, and is it exposed? Is the database exposed? Is it exposed to the internet? Things like that. So this way, our digital security team can say, hey, we need to act on this versus, this can wait for a week. It's not a P1. I don't have to wake somebody up at 3 a.m., things like that. So, I just put Log4j up there, but to remind myself, for example, when we had the Log4j issue, which I'm sure was across every single enterprise here, it was super helpful for us to see what Dynatrace could tell us in our environment and which exact things were actually exposed and needed to be taken care of right there and then versus things that could have been remediated over the course of the week. Right. So, additional value. So, one of the things that I hear from my boss all the time is, how can we get more value out of this, right? So, we're going beyond. So we've been with Dynatrace for like a year and a half now. So the first year, I think, was dedicated more to the traditional APM monitoring, making sure everything from end to end, every log, every metric that we could think of was coming to the platform, right? But now we're at this point where, we're pretty stable in the monitoring portion, right? But how do we now drive more value out of the platform? So one of the things that we started doing now is what we call business process monitoring. we are looking at these things that we call biz events within Dynatrace to basically trigger data about different processes that are disconnected but connected to us, right? So to us, these like 20 different things that happen in a chain or whatever make up one thing. So we've started to get those signals in to then say, okay, well, this thing broke at this point, and instead of it being a disconnected thing going to one team, now we know that, okay, well, this one process broke, which broke these 7 other things, and that's why these 7 things are broken, and we don't have to go hunt for that. So it's really helping us kind of put everything into context, which has been super helpful. We have a lot of like workflow automations that we've been doing. So that's another piece within Dynatrace that we really use a lot. We have really complex workflows. We also have really simple workflows. So, an example of one of our complex ones is, when there's certain jobs that are happening, they're getting triggered, what triggers them, and there's a lot that goes beyond with what's happening with those automated jobs. But then we also have simple workflows that say, hey, if I reach a certain license threshold, go open the ServiceNow ticket for me to order additional licenses. So we were working with our Office 365 team, and they wanted to get alerted on when they're running out of licenses, because they had a guy that would literally just log in every morning, look at the license status, and then either order more or not. And sometimes they would get missed because this person would always have time. So we've even done, workflows like that. So very simple thing, because we already have the data and we can trigger something like that on there. There's also custom applications. So, I think I kind of showed you guys some of the dashboards and views that we have, but Dynatrace has also allowed us to take that a step further and really just write our own app on top of it. The only reason you would want to do that really is because sometimes dashboards are neat, but you want to have like very advanced functionality, and you can build that on top of Dynatrace. So, we have a couple of apps that we've already released out there. One of them has to do with our network monitoring. We're bringing network monitoring data there. We have application data, and it's really just to answer the question, is it the network? So we created an app that literally answers the question. You select your application in there, and it'll tell you if it's the network or not. So there's also, ability to do automated alert responses, right? So a lot of times, if you guys think about it, you get a alert for a disk space, right? 99.9% of the time, you're just going to add more disk space. So, that's a really simple one where we've like automated the response is, okay, well, if this alert happens, it's in production, we're always just increasing the space. So why not just take that step out and do it automatically? So that's a simple one. We had another instance where we had a Java application that would constantly crash. And the vendor knew about the issue, but the fix wouldn't be there for a month. So we had to, figure out a way to remediate this, right? So every time like it would, crash, we would just have to restart it. So why even, we were sending those signals, but why even do that? If we already know we're going to just restart it 100% of the time, we might as well automate that piece. So that's another, example of some of the automated responses that we did. All right. So, with all of that, like, what are our overall results? So over the past year, basically we've measured 140% return on investment. We've had significant cost savings, enhanced operational efficiency, automated outage handling, and a lot of time savings for sure.
How did you guys calculate the 140% return on investment?
So, it wasn't just like one simple answer to that, right? So, like I said, there was a lot of those things that are under there, and the slide contributed to that ROI. So, like I said, we're, as a team, we're always trying to deliver value, right? Like internally, we're a cost center. So how do we prove that we did something great, right? Is we have to consistently prove our value to our business. And so we're always like measuring, right? So I think I talked about those KPIs earlier. So, by us helping a team reduce their MTTR or their MTTD, right? All of those things, add to the incremental value that we delivered, and so it's not a simple answer, but it's a lot of those things. So those cost savings, by helping our optimization team figure out, hey, what are the resources that are over provisioned, right? Those are hard dollar savings, and then there's time savings, right? By knowing now we're reducing the time that people are spending to figure out where the issue is by telling them where the issue is, right? So we've really reduced our mean time to resolve for a lot of things. So that also brings on savings. So it was a complex mathematical thing there, but that's where we're at today.
No, absolutely.
Yep. And so I'm going to hand it back over to you, Matt, so you can show them a little bit of the platform.
Thank you. So we figured, presentations are great, and hopefully you guys are enjoying the conversation, but we wanted to keep it a little bit more entertaining, so we're also going to spend a little bit of time actually in the live environment, so you guys can see what Dynatrace can do, and then actually see it in action. So let me see if we can work it out technically in here. Perfect. You guys should be able to see my screen, right? All right, awesome. So there's a lot that we talked about, right? If we really start thinking about everything that Ustad just mentioned, the ability to start the journey with Dynatrace and AWS and actually, as he said, I love that, he said stop the bleeding, right?
Right.
But how do you stop the bleeding, right? You have 60 outages a month, right? So basically outage or 2 a day. How do I figure out where these outages are? And the screen that you guys are looking at right now, we in Dynatrace call Smartscape topology. Now, I gave it my own name. I like to think that sometimes I'm creative. And I actually call it the real-time architecture diagram. That was one of the first things that BPX did to understand actually what their environment looks like. And because if you don't know what your environment looks like, whether it's fully in AWS or whether it is a hybrid environment, how can you understand where there are issues? How can you understand what these issues mean to the business? That's why Ustad was talking a lot about the feeling. Like there was a feeling that application is performing well, or there was a feeling that application is performing poorly. But they didn't have the data to back it up. So moving into Dynatrace, they were able to start with that real-time architecture diagram. And what you guys are looking at here is obviously my demo environment. But what it shows you the power of capturing data with Dynatrace in a very, very easy way. If you remember, Ustad said that one of the main drivers behind choosing Dynatrace was the ease of instrumentation, the ease of deployment. And this is a perfect example. You guys are actually looking at an AWS environment in here that is running, in this specific case, Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes workloads. And you guys probably all know how busy it can get when you're using Cloud Foundry or you're using Kubernetes. So imagine now that you would have to manually deploy things to start capturing the application telemetry, the infrastructure telemetry. Well, with Dynatrace, you can forget about the manual deployment once and for all. All you have to do is throw the one agent on the compute layers in your environment, and that's all that you need to do. From there, Dynatrace will automatically instrument your workloads. It'll automatically instrument your application code, and it will build the real-time architecture diagram of your environment. As your environment is scaling up, scaling down, obviously, Ustad talked a lot about the business processes. There's probably processes that are triggering a scaling up of our environment, and maybe when the users are not using it, it's scaling down. This will automatically adjust, providing you real-time visibility into your environment. This real-time architecture diagram is also very important because it empowers our AIOps engine to deliver the 2 capabilities that we talked about before, the predictive capability and the causal capability. Every single component that you're looking at in here, even though that this is, let's call it a 10,000 or maybe even a 30,000-foot view, if you look at an infrastructure level, we'll capture CPU, memory, network I/O. If you look on a process level, we'll capture the memory footprint. We'll capture the worker processes. We'll capture the time spent in suspension. If you look at the application code, right, you will actually look at, let's say, Nginx piece of code, and you will look at the response times. You will look at the throughput. You will look at failure rate. The beauty of that is that Dynatrace will actually use the predictive capability of our AIOps engine to understand what is the normal performance of your environment. And now when the real-time data starts deviating from that baseline, will automatically open up for you problem cards. And Ustad also gave a very good example in here that now with Dynatrace, they even took it to the next level. They're not even sometimes waiting for the problem card. They're actually using that predictive model in here to understand whether there's already issues in the application, maybe before the problem card is open or maybe before the user is already impacted. But when Dynatrace opens up a problem card, Another great feature in here and great capability that helps a lot of our customers, but Ustad, I think it definitely helped you with lowering the number of 60 incidents, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Why do you guys think that is? Right? You really don't need a PhD in Dynatrace to understand what's happening in here. This is where our causal capability of the AIOps engine comes into play. On the left-hand side, you guys will actually see the business impact of this issue. So now, Ustad showed you a dashboard where we actually show the business. How is the application impacted? All that data is now at his fingertips, and he can understand that in this specific case, he would have an impact to 88 users interacting with the Easy Trade application, performing specific user actions. Think about the time that you are able to save in here, not having to dig around, not having to involve 30 people in a call to understand what's happening in your environment. Dynatrace tells you right away what's the impact. Now, knowing the impact is important because now you can define a course of action. If it's an issue in the middle of the night and there's no users being impacted, maybe you don't have to wake anybody up. Maybe you can actually use the automation that they built in to remediate the issue. But sometimes you might need to take an action. And taking an action only makes sense when you know what you need to do in your environment to take that action and actually remediate that issue. Here's now where the causal capability comes into place. Knowing how your environment looks like, knowing how it's performing, our AIOps engine for every single problem card in your environment will perform RCA, root cause analysis. And the goal of that RCA is to deliver on the golden platter for you the specific component, the specific event in your environment that caused the issue in the first place. So it's that, how big of a game changer was this, where you could actually look at a problem card and see, I know exactly what's happening?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely been a huge game changer, right? And especially then tracking, like if the same components are breaking over and over again, right? You can prioritize with your dev teams to say, hey guys, look, this has caused me 20 failures in the last 20 days. Like, we need to fix this first. So it's definitely a game changer. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? So now you have all of that at your fingertips, so you can engage the right teams, get it remediated, in some cases hopefully be proactive enough so nothing else happens in your environment, nobody even knows that there was a bottleneck, that there was an issue. Now, we looked at everything maybe from that 10,000-foot view, but let's go a little bit deeper. I'm sure some of you is wondering, well, what happens when I'm telling you that the root cause of this issue is a database? Well, some of you are thinking, well, what do you mean by database? And the beauty of Dynatrace also is that we are coming in with a lot of built-in analysis tools. So you're literally one click away to understand what caused the failure in a database. We'll specifically call out for you the exceptions and the reason for the failures. We'll show you the exact database calls that was impacted. And if you are a developer in this room, or maybe you are dealing with a lot of developers, we'll provide you something that will be very important to you guys, which is the stack trace of this issue. Now from there, instead of having to build other dashboards and really spending time understanding how you need to interact with Dynatrace, you can natively interact with all that data. And because that data is in context, you could just dive in from, let's say, analyzing your failure to distributed traces. And as I dive into distributed traces, now you see everything that happened in that transaction. Every single hop in your environment, whether it was quick, whether it was slow, whether it failed, whether it succeeded. Now, the beauty of that is, and what I also want to bring in here is, we didn't talk about it too much, Ustad, but how important was the ability to also ingest logs to part of this process, right? And look at it in a single platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're currently ingesting about 6 terabytes of logs a day. I mean, everything in our environment at the end of the day is logs, so.
Yeah, if you really look at the fundamentals of observability or monitoring, logs has been the one that's been around for the longest. And as much as some of us would like to pitch and say, no, I don't need logs. I have traces, I have metrics, I'm fine. The reality of it is that is not true. And sometimes the only way to really understand what's happening in your environment is to look at that log. Sometimes your developers just natively will log things in the log rather than actually triggering an exception. Well, so think about this. I'm looking at a piece of code in here in Dynatrace. I can tell you what's happening on the code level side. I can tell you how much time you're spending. I can tell you what method, what function is executing. But I can also jump into logs, and I can see every single log message, every single log event that was being generated. Single pane of glass, unifying all the data for you. So in that case, you don't have to be jumping between Dynatrace or any other tool and now manually correlating that data. Right? So whether it is an actual performance issue, I actually find a lot of customers use it in here for business issues, right? Maybe from the performance perspective, everything is fine. A bunch of 200 calls, but maybe the payload didn't carry the right value or the right variable. And now the call actually from the business perspective fails. So here's now what Ustad was talking about, not only monitoring their environment from the performance perspective, but also tap into these business processes, right?
Right.
Understanding if the business logic is actually working well, right?
Yep.
Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you guys on the demo before we actually talk about the future state of the collaboration here with AWS and BPX, and we'll open up for some Q&A, is the security portion. I actually was going to ask you a question when you were talking about the security, but you covered it so well that if I asked the question, you would just have to repeat what you said. But I don't know if you guys caught it. One of the words that Ustad used when talking about the ability to work with Dynatrace application security is the word prioritization, right? I mean, I'm sure as BPX, how many security tools you guys already had in-house that told you about Log4j?
At least 4, you know.
So now you're in the scenario where, so I have 4 tools that already tell me where all of the Log4j is. Why in the world would I enable another tool, another platform like Dynatrace to tell me more about it? And the one word that explains it is prioritization. How does this work with Dynatrace? We know how our environment is architected. We know how it works at all times. You guys are right now looking at 471 vulnerabilities. There's plenty of tools, even here on the Expo, that can give you exactly the same numbers. Now, not many of them can actually come in here and add context to it. Again, having all that telemetry, having all that data from your environment, all I have to do is come in here and say, show me only vulnerabilities that have public internet exposure. And show me only the vulnerabilities that have public exploit published. And last but not least, show me only the ones where I'm actually invoking the vulnerable function. And maybe sometimes we're beating the Log4j scenario to death, and we use it so often, but it's such a perfect use case in here. Because Log4j was such an important framework, it was everywhere. But when you had thousands of vulnerabilities in here and going through an Excel spreadsheet, your developers really quickly were realizing that most of those frameworks are either in a code that's in a lower environment behind a firewall, or maybe you're not actually even invoking the vulnerable function that could expose you to a threat in here. With Dynatrace, Ustad was able to do this, right?
Right.
At the filters and at his fingertips, he knew exactly what his developers, what his application teams have to prioritize. So with that said, I just wanted to make sure that we show you guys a little bit of the live demo in here, live demonstration, so we don't spend all the time in the PowerPoint. What we are going to do next, we're actually going to dive into a little blurb about the future collaboration between BPX, AWS, and Dynatrace, and then we'll close out with some Q&A. So Ustad, I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, you want to switch it back?
Yeah.
All right. So, what does the future hold for us, right? So we are a big AWS customer. We build on AWS, and I'm sure you guys have heard AI like 100 times, thousands of times in this conference. And as a matter of fact, we have another session from BPX that my boss is giving on AI at this exact moment. So, what's next for us with Dynatrace and AWS is really now, as we move into that new AI and start using some of these features and start doing these large AI deployments and start using LLMs, the next step for us is really how do we now monitor this LLM deployment that we're doing internally. How do we see how it's working properly, what it's costing, is it really driving the value we thought it would deliver? So that's literally what's next in the next month, 2 months for us.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we have 2 minutes left, so definitely want to give you guys enough time to head to your next session if you guys are heading. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's Thursday, and maybe you're already tired with Vegas, but thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you guys next year as well. If you haven't stopped by our booth yet, the Dynatrace booth is booth 614. We will be there today until 4 p.m. We still have some swag left, so stop by, and then we can continue these conversations.
And if you're staying behind, this evening we have the AWS customer reception, a replay, so you're more than welcome to have some fun and relive some of the moments from this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.